Good evening all. I'm Gregory Lewis, designated the chair of these meetings by the the Brooklyn Borough President, Antonio Reynoso. And these meetings are being recorded according to comply with the Public Officers Law. So I'm joined by Carol Ann Church, the Director of Community Boards here, and Jesus Marshall here at Brooklyn, the Office of Brooklyn Borough President. Ms. Church, would you please call the roll?
Okay, today I'll start with the community boards. Community Board 1. Here. Thank you. Community Board 2. Community Board 3. Community Board 4. Name, please. Thank you. Community Board 5. Thank you. Community Board 6. Name, please. Thank you. We got it. Community Board 7. Thank you. Community Board 8. Community Board 9. Community Board 10. Thank you. Community Board 11. Community Board 12. Community Board 13. Community Board 14. Community Board 15. Thank you. Community Board 16. Thank you. Community Board 17. Community Board 18. Okay. Starting with council member representatives. Community Board 14. I see you, Carl. Council Districts. City Council District 33, Member Ressler. Council District 34, Member Gutierrez. District 35, Member Hudson. District 36, Member Osei. District 37, Member Nurse. Hey. Thank you. District 38, Member Aviles. District 39, Member Hanif. District 40, Member Joseph. District 41, Member Mealy. District 42, Member Banks. District 43, Member Zwang. District 44, Member Yeager. District 45, Member Louis. Hey. I didn't see him at all. District 46, Member Narcisse. District 47, Member Brennan. Name, please? Michael. District 48, Member Vernikov. District 50, Member Carr. Here. Hi, nice to meet you. Are you Giuseppe? Pardon? Michael. Thank you. And Borough President's Office, represented.
Recognizing also Chairperson Bucereth of Community Board 3. With 18 Borough Board members present, we have a quorum. With there being a quorum, we now turn to proceed as follows. Circulated with the notice of meeting was a proposed agenda for this meeting. Did any member present tonight not receive a copy of the agenda? Copy of the agenda is also on the table up front. Seeing no one not having received or failed to receive the agenda, are there any objections to adopting the proposed agenda as the agenda of this meeting? Hearing no objections, the proposed agenda is adopted as the agenda of this May 2024 Borough Board meeting. Also circulated with the proposed agenda was a copy of proposed minutes for the March 5th, 2024 meeting of the Borough Board. Did any member not or fail to receive a copy of the proposed minutes of the March 5th, 2024 Borough Board meeting? Hearing that no one failed to receive a copy of the proposed minutes, I now ask whether any member objects to the adoption of the proposed minutes of the March 5th, 2024 meeting as the official minutes. Yes. Yes, you absolutely may. Certainly. Does anyone object to amending the proposed minutes of the March 5th, 2024 meeting to add to it a line representing that Councilmember Crystal Hudson was represented by Miss Addison? Any objection? Hearing no objection, the proposed minutes for the March 5th, 2024 Borough Board meeting are duly amended to reflect that Councilmember Crystal Hudson, District 35, was represented by Casey Addison at that meeting. Yes.
Mr. Lewis, I believe I may have sent an email yesterday or 2 days ago. In the update section of the March 5th minutes, I propose an amendment to revise the time stated for the conference from 3 to 7 to 4 to 7.
Perfect.
So that's not.
Thank you. Any objections to amending the proposed minutes for the March 5th, 2024 Borough Board meeting to reflect in the section relating to other business that the time of the conference involving Community Board 14 be changed from 3 to 7 to now reflect 4 to 7? Any objection? Hearing no objection, the proposed minutes are so amended. Any objection to adopting the proposed minutes for the March 5th, 2024 meeting circulated by email and amended tonight by, with the 2 changes previously noted? Hearing no objections, the proposed minutes are duly adopted as the official minutes of the March 5th, 2024 meeting, reflecting the 2 amendments approved today. That brings us to agenda item number 4, and that is updates from Brooklyn Borough Hall. The first update is that Community Board applications closed on February 22nd, and the 2024 cohort of appointees from the Office of Brooklyn Borough President, or by the Borough President, were announced on April 25th. We also want to note that redistricting happened, and that means that some boards are now very different from what they were previously. 239 new members were appointed by the Brooklyn Borough President. As some other overview or high-level principles about appointments, the Brooklyn Borough President continues to stress the importance of members attending both committee and general meetings. That is a matter of emphasis in terms of the borough president's exercise of the power of appointment. The community board team here at the Office of Brooklyn Borough President is working on a swearing-in and orientation event that will both educate and entertain all members who are new and those receiving their first or fifth reappointment are expected to attend either virtually or in person. Please note that in-person attendance is limited to the first 150 persons. It's like a club. If you want to be here, get online early. Due to space restrictions, we can't accommodate plus ones. However, members should feel free to share the virtual link. The event will be scheduled and the invitation updated when a date for this orientation is set. Another update. Brooklyn Borough President Reynoso is accepting applications for pre-K to grade 12 graduation awards. School administrators may nominate a student in each of three categories. The categories are Merit, Perseverance, and Brooklyn for All Awards. Applications for these nominations will close on May 17th at 5 p.m. Visit the Contact Us section on the Brooklyn Borough President's website or call 718-802-3700 for more information. Note that the next proposed Borough Board meeting, I'll talk about this again toward the end of the meeting, would be on Tuesday, June 4th at 6 p.m. And as a last update from Brooklyn Borough Hall, this month, Brooklyn Borough President Reynoso extends greetings to the Asian American Pacific Islander and Haitian communities, as well as our fellow Jewish American neighbors as they highlight and celebrate their cultures. We also celebrate all mothers. Those are the Borough Hall updates. That brings us on to agenda item number 5, unfinished business, of which there is none from the previous meeting, which therefore brings us to agenda item number 6, communications and report. This is a presentation from the New York City Department of Planning, City Planning, on the City of Yes for housing opportunity. DCP, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Hi, everyone. My name is David Weissglass. I'm here representing the Department of City Planning. Work in the Brooklyn Borough office. I see some faces that are familiar here as we've begun to already begin some of our outreach for the City of Yes of housing opportunity. And so I'm excited to introduce some of the proposals that we have here, and we're looking forward to continuing our public engagement both in this forum and at your individual community boards in the coming months to get some feedback. All right, so really what we're trying to do here is amend our zoning code and our zoning resolution to allow a little bit more housing in every neighborhood. What we found is that removing some of our barriers to some of the zoning barriers will allow a lot more housing growth and help alleviate our housing shortage, which leads, of course, to high prices and a lot of other issues that I'll get into in a bit. This is a citywide plan, and this encourages incremental housing growth over a wide geography. So I'd like to explain how you can expect this proposal to apply and impact your neighborhoods. Sped up a little bit. So first, I'd like to go over what the housing shortage really means for people in New York. I know a lot of us have experienced this already, but it is important to go over. Really what we have is a very, very, very significant housing shortage, right? We have very low vacancy rates. And what low vacancy rates do is they put all the power in the hands of landlords and property owners, which really forces tenants to compete with each other, right, to get housing. The vacancy rate for rental apartments is historically low in New York City. It's about 1.4% and even lower in Brooklyn at about 1.27%. This is far, far, far lower than what is determined to be a really healthy vacancy rate to help ensure that people can find housing that they need at an affordable price point. Our housing demand is so much greater than our housing supply, and so we have significant housing costs. Over half of New Yorkers are rent burdened, which means that they spend over 30% of their income on rent. Not having enough homes is also determined to be a direct cause of the homelessness crisis as well, right? So each night we see over 92,000 homeless New Yorkers sleeping in shelters, and that includes over 33,000 children as well. So, we go around New York City, we see cranes, we see construction, and I think it's easy for us to assume, myself included, that we're always building a ton of housing. And actually, this really isn't necessarily the case in comparison to the demand for housing in our city. So most of New York City's housing, as you can see here, was created in the first half of the 20th century. And since that time, housing production has fallen pretty dramatically, right, as you can see over the decades here. That's in large part because of zoning requirements. Zoning became increasingly restrictive in 1961 when our modern zoning resolution was adopted. And while housing production has decreased, the demand for housing has only increased. So there are a number of reasons for this. For instance, households are smaller today than they used to be, meaning that even the same amount of people take up more space. There we go. So when we look here, we can see what recent housing production has occurred has actually really been limited to only a few neighborhoods in New York City and in Brooklyn specifically as well. In 2023, only 10 community districts across the city produced as much housing as the other 49 combined. And when some neighborhoods stop producing housing, that puts additional pressure on the rest of our neighborhoods to produce more and more and more new housing to accommodate that increased demand. So what we hope to do is allow a little bit more housing in every neighborhood that can help ease the demand pressure on these existing neighborhoods that have had a lot of housing growth. That can help ensure that housing growth is more equitable across the borough and across the city. The proposals in the City of Yes for housing opportunity, these emerged from the goals that were outlined in Where We Live NYC. That was the city's fair housing plan. Where We Live NYC was created by the Department of Housing Preservation and Development, and that was in collaboration with over 250 community organizations. That highlights how the city's housing shortage and affordability crisis have severely limited New Yorkers' housing choices. In a tight housing market, landlords can charge very high rents, and existing tenants are vulnerable, right, to tenant harassment, to poor housing quality, to displacement pressures as they compete with each other, as I stated previously. So to make this quite simple, landlords and property owners have very little reason to lower rents, to update their appliances, to fix problems very quickly because they know that tenants don't have a lot of options, right? They hold a lot of this power. And when there are so few apartments to choose from, renters pay more, right? In Brooklyn, 52.6% of renters are considered rent burden by paying over 30% of their income on rent. These conditions worsen neighborhood-based legacies of segregation, discrimination, and concentrated poverty that have led to deeply unequal city that we have today, where neighborhoods have unequal access to resources and opportunities. There we go. So the average New York City household makes about $70,000 a year. But the average two-bedroom apartment in New York City is over $2,700, right? This means that your average working family of three would have to spend about half their income on rent to get a home for their family. Obviously, a huge problem that we're seeking to alleviate here. And, we tend to get lost, I think, in a lot of the numbers and a lot of this data and research, but it's important to remember that New York City's dire housing shortage has direct human consequences, right? And these have been underscored in our extended community engagement process in developing some of these proposals. So over the past year, we've met with over 100 groups, including housing nonprofits, tenants' rights groups, faith-based organizations, and affordable housing providers. And each of these groups was able to share unique and valuable perspectives on the lived experiences resulting from our housing crisis. You can see here just a couple of examples of things that we've heard of people who can only find housing a long distance away, which leads to high commute times and less time being able to spend, with themselves and with their family and friends. People who are forced into the shelter situation because they can't find affordable homes. They can't move back to their neighborhoods that they spent, most of their lives in. And then, retirees watching their friends and family have to move out of state because there's no way for them to continue living in the place that they called home for so long. This is just an example, right? And other issues include overcrowding into tiny units, which is undesirable in its own right for many people. And also, we saw the impact of that during the COVID crisis when we had so many people in small units. Economically, the housing crisis is also very painful, right? When we fail to produce housing, we feel the economic consequences. When people have to spend so much of their income on housing, they have less money to spend on everything else. Plus, allowing New Yorkers to build more housing can also help to create good quality jobs in construction and residential maintenance that we estimate can add about $58.2 billion to the city's economy and create over 260,000 jobs. Now, I want to emphasize zoning is only one tool to address the housing crisis. Is this going to solve our housing crisis just by reforming the zoning resolution? No, certainly not. It's insufficient in doing so, but it is necessary. There's no way to alleviate our housing crisis without taking a bit of aim at some of the restrictions and the onerous restrictions that keep housing from being constructed. Again, many city agencies, they work on policies and programs that aim to address New Yorkers' housing needs. The Department of City Planning, now we're responsible for the city's zoning, right? Zoning regulates what can be built on a particular site. I think of it in terms of use and space, right? What you can use your land for and how big you can build your building, both the height and how far back it can go, things like that. But zoning also includes other things, right? It includes requirements for income-restricted affordable housing, which we'll talk a little bit more about here and how that is impacted by the City of Yes for Housing Opportunity. But zoning does not fund new housing. It doesn't directly control what can be built. It only establishes rules for what may be built. So how much housing gets built depends on many factors, a lot of which are outside of our control. Other tools the city uses to support good housing outcomes include subsidies or tax incentives to promote income-restricted affordable housing, programs for affordable home ownership, and tenant protections that guarantee New Yorkers' rights. These are all incredibly important, and DCP, we don't deny that whatsoever, but we don't have the scope to address them now within the Department of City Planning. What we do have the ability to control is our zoning resolution. So that's what we seek to do with this amendment. There we go. So our thought process here is we have a significant supply shortage. We need a lot more apartments, a lot more different kinds of apartments for people in different living situations. And so when we're thinking, how can we make sure that more apartments are added, but without making sure that without having certain neighborhoods undergo significant aesthetic change or overtaxing infrastructure, how can we do that? We can spread it out, right? We can make this a citywide proposal to make sure that every neighborhood adds a little bit of housing. And it may not seem like a lot in one neighborhood or on one street or block, but when you add the entire city together, it really could take a significant dent in the housing shortage. So if each neighborhood adds a little bit more housing, we could add more housing overall without any single neighborhood or small number of neighborhoods experiencing dramatic changes or overtaxed infrastructure. So I'll get into the brunt of the proposal here and some of the details, right? And so this is an overview of the entire city. You could see that the low-density districts, those are R1 through R5 districts, are shown in blue. And the medium and high-density districts, those are R6 through R10 districts, those are shown in yellow. This is citywide. I'm going to fast forward to see Brooklyn right here. Again, low-density districts R1 through R5 are in blue, and high-density districts R6 through R10 are shown in yellow. Each of those categories or umbrellas of districts have different aspects of the proposal applying to them, and I'll go over them now. So in the low-density proposals, first and foremost, the proposal would aim to add a bit more missing middle housing, right? These are low-rise apartment buildings in our low-density areas, right? And again, shown here in blue. The proposal also aims to help homeowners in these low-density neighborhoods by allowing them to build accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, to their homes or to their properties, providing small buildings with additional flexibility to adapt over time as well. When we go to high-density districts, and here we're looking at the yellow here, What we are doing, and something we're very proud of, is what we're calling the Universal Affordability Preference, or UAP for short. This would allow larger buildings for affordable and supportive housing in every medium and high-density zoning district. Across the city, we're also adding a few more proposals. The proposal would make parking optional. Parking requirements have been proven to make housing much more expensive. And there's a range of smaller proposals included as well, including enabling conversion of non-residential buildings to housing, allowing more small and shared apartments, and allowing for residential campuses to add height-limited buildings. All right, so I'll go into a little bit more detail on some of our low-density proposals here. So again, this shows the entire city. I know it can be a little bit difficult to see here as different shades of blue, but the lightest shades of blue, those are our single-family districts. Slightly darker are two-family districts, and slightly darker still are our low-density multifamily districts, which are basically low-density districts that allow 3 or more units on a parcel, or at least they say they do. And I'll go a little bit more in depth here so you can see this in Brooklyn. All right. Now, exclusionary zoning rules have made it virtually impossible to build housing in many low-density neighborhoods, placing additional pressure on the high-density parts of the city to produce all of the housing that's demanded. This wasn't always the case, right? Small apartment buildings, 2 to 3 family homes are common in almost all of New York City's lower-density neighborhoods and were allowed in many places as recently as the 90s and early 2000s when additional stricter zoning regulations prevented them from being built. So what we're trying to do is reintroduce these modest buildings that are more naturally affordable than other types of construction, and apartment buildings at a scale in which they can take advantage of existing affordability programs. Right? Together, these changes allow for creation of more housing in low-density areas without significantly affecting neighborhood character. And that's something I really want to hone in on, is that a lot of the proposals that we have here would allow buildings that we already see in a lot of these low-density neighborhoods. What we found in a lot of our outreach and a lot of our research is some of the most beloved buildings that are in some of our neighborhoods actually couldn't be built today. And so all we're trying to do is allow some of those buildings to be constructed that already really fit into the character of a lot of these neighborhoods. There we go. So the first of our low-density proposals, and again, I will hone in on Brooklyn in a second, but I'll give you just a quick idea of what we're doing here. We're calling this town center zoning. And this is another example of some of the buildings that we already see in a lot of our low-density neighborhoods that actually could not be built today. So what we want to do is create, again, more missing middle housing in low-density areas. Missing middle, what does that mean? That refers to the category of housing that's modest in scale and often more naturally affordable to middle-income residents. It's a once common type of housing that's really not often built in the city anymore. Right? It's folks who can't afford a lot of the higher-end luxury units, but don't have the income that makes them qualify for affordable housing through HPD or other subsidies. And so a lot of those folks are kind of left out, hence our missing middle moniker there. And so what we want to do is re-legalize some of these mixed-use apartments or buildings with a ground floor commercial use and a few stories of housing on top. Here I'll actually zoom into Brooklyn here so you could see where these would be applicable. Right, and so these would be applicable in all commercial overlays over a low-density residential district, right? So many of you in your neighborhoods will see R1 through R5 with a commercial overlay on top, right? And so this is a classic New York City building type that exists in many low-density commercial corridors, right? Non-conforming or non-complying uses that already were built before the modern zoning resolution came into effect. There's overly complex rules nowadays that make it almost impossible to build a lot of these buildings. So you can see on the right side of that image there, that building may already exist, but you can't replicate it right next door. And what we want to do is allow that to be replicable. Make it, once again, feasible to build 2 to 4 stories of housing above a commercial ground floor. Another part of our proposal is transit-oriented development, is that what we're calling it. Again, showing all of New York City, and I'll zoom in on Brooklyn right here. And I'll have a note about the actual applicability here because there's a not complete, I think, in this map. But what we're trying to do with transit-oriented development is allow some of these low-rise buildings, roughly 3 to 5 stories in height, depending on the underlying zoning, on sites that are near transit and meet specific criteria. And so that's an important part of the criteria here. They need to be near transit, which you can see here. It needs to be on a lot or a property that's over 5,000 square feet in size, and it needs to be on the short end of a block or facing a street that's over 75 feet wide. So what you see here on this map, shown in purple, is all the low-density districts that are within a half mile of transit, right, near transit. However, many, and I would venture to say most of the sites that are shown here actually would not be applicable to this proposal because they're not necessarily over 5,000 square feet on the short end of a block or on a wide street, if that kind of makes sense. So we didn't really have the graphic design ability to put in the specifics there, but that's something that I do want to make very clear here. Finally, in low-density districts, here we go. The rest of our low-density areas, the proposal aims to give homeowners much more flexibility. So under this proposal, a 1 or a 2 family home in any district would be allowed to add a small accessory dwelling unit or an ADU. We're actually in the zoning resolution calling them ancillary dwelling units, but still ADUs. And there are a range of types of ADUs. These are proposals that have been successful in several other cities in the U.S. And these small units provide important housing options for smaller households. It can help a young person moving into their own place for the first time. It can help an elderly resident kind of age in place on the property with the rest of their family, but still have a little bit of privacy and their own unit. Because they're small size, they also serve different income levels, right, than a large single-family home. They tend to be more naturally affordable. Successful ADU programs have been implemented in a lot of other locations, including in Austin, Seattle, all over the state of Connecticut. And these show us that these small units can give multi-generational families a little bit more space and help middle-class homeowners with household expenses. The proposal also includes rules to ensure that ADUs are safe. Now, new basement ADUs would not be allowed in coastal floodplain areas, and no ADUs at all would be allowed in special coastal risk districts. Right? These are areas of the city that are the most severe flood risk, and we want to make sure that these ADUs are safe. Outside of the coastal areas, basement ADUs may be subject to additional regulations and review. Right? These all have to go through the permitting system that we've got, and they'd be inspected by the Department of Buildings and the rest of our applicable agencies. Additionally, we'd like to help homeowners, right? The same rule changes that enable ADUs can also help homeowners who don't want to add an ADU necessarily, but they do need more flexibility to adapt or renovate their homes to meet their needs at this point in time. Right? Family needs change over time, and we're well aware of that. What your housing situation may work now may not work in 5 years or even in 2 years. So our research shows that in many existing buildings, like I said previously, a lot of these buildings are out of compliance already. And if you live in a building that's out of compliance, that's not today's rules, it makes it incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to make even minor alterations to your home, right? To add an additional bedroom, even to renovate a kitchen or something like that. These cause severe headaches for homeowners if they need to borrow money from the bank, if they want to make small changes. So what we do is we want to fix these rules, and these would have 2 benefits, right? First, homeowners of existing buildings wouldn't run into those severe headaches or issues when they go to make an alteration because the zoning would better match what's actually on the ground. Additionally, you'll be able to build a 2-family home in a 2-family district or a multifamily home in a multifamily district. What that means really is that we have many zoning districts today that are 2-family or multifamily in name only. There's a lot of our districts that say, yes, you could build 3, 4, 5 apartments, but when you add all of the regulations for parking, for rear yard, front yard, setbacks, height, etc., it really doesn't become feasible to build what is allowed in name at all. And so what we want to do is actually allow what is intended to be allowed. All right, and I'll move now to our medium and high density districts. Those are R6 through R10 districts. So you see these all in yellow here. Again, this is the entire city, and I'll zoom into Brooklyn in just a moment. So really our main proposal in high density districts is what we're calling the Universal Affordability Preference, or UAP for short. And here I'll zoom in I thought I had Brooklyn shown here. I suppose I don't, but that's okay. Really what we're doing here is allowing, where am I? I got lost here. Here we go. Allowing apartment buildings to be approximately 20% larger than they already are, so long as that extra space is occupied by permanently affordable or supportive housing. What UAP is not doing is updating, changing in any way the market rate FARs. The market rate FARs that are there today will remain exactly the same, but will allow a slight bump in FARs as long as that extra space is occupied by permanently affordable or supportive housing. Right? UAP is modeled after current rules that allow bigger buildings for affordable senior housing. Those are AIRS units, affordable income-restricted housing for seniors. Right? UAP would allow incremental housing growth in neighborhoods and encourage affordable housing throughout the city rather than concentrating it in only a few neighborhoods, right? As opposed to MIH or VIH, UAP would be allowed in high-density districts citywide as an option that we think could really be beneficial. So what you see here is kind of that darker orange and that lighter tangerine color. And I'll zoom in again on Brooklyn here to show us what we've got. There we go. Right. So what we see in the lighter orange, which I know is a little bit faint and difficult to see, in these lighter orange areas, those are districts in which currently, today, under the status quo, there's about a 20% or so FAR bump for affordable housing for seniors. That already exists today. If you want to build affordable housing for seniors, you already get a little bit of more floor area. And we thought, well, why not allow that bump for all types of affordable housing, not necessarily restricted only to affordable housing for seniors. In the darker orange, the UAP would still apply, but the darker orange areas are those in which today, under the status quo, there is not that affordable housing for seniors bump. In that case, we'll be creating a small bump in the FAR that's roughly about matches the percentage bump that are in some of those lighter tangerine places. And really, again, all that would be allowed in this additional FAR is permanently affordable or supportive housing. And the proposal would also make sure that zoning regulations provide room to build the extra affordable housing required through UAP, right? So there would be limited height increases where it's necessary to make enough room for these affordable homes. And I have a couple drawings that can show what that might look like. I think I might have gone too far there. There we go. So what does affordability mean for UAP? What we've heard from many people is that the current voluntary inclusionary housing, VIH, what you see for short, they have an AMI range of 80% of AMI, and what we've heard from many folks is that's just not affordable for a vast majority of New Yorkers or a significant number of New Yorkers. So we wanted to create something more advantageous, and we think we've done so here. So the average AMI required for this extra affordability under UAP would be 60%. However, also unlike VIH, we will now allow income averaging, right? And that's something that's very important because that means that not all of the additional housing will be strictly at 60%. It'll allow for a range of housing types for a range of different families and individuals who have different incomes and needs. Right? So at 60% AMI, that's approximately $76,260 for a family of three. UAP would serve lower income New Yorkers than the existing VIH tool. UAP would essentially replace VIH where it's mapped, and it would also be mapped across the rest of our high density districts. It would not replace mandatory inclusionary housing. MIH would still continue to exist, which requires a percentage of new developments to be income-restricted affordable housing. That would continue to exist. Those would continue to be maps when there are significant increases in residential density in a zoning map amendment. I'm aiming here. Here we go. So this is just another kind of illustration of what we mean here. So what you could look at here in the bottom right-hand corner is something that would be permitted with income averaging, which is currently not permitted with VIH. Under VIH, all of those apartments are 80% AMI. There's no average permitted. However, for a building taking advantage of the universal affordability preference, you could see a situation in which folks would add not just 60% AMI units, but also 30% AMI units and 90%, as long as the average comes out to a maximum of 60%. And so this helps build not just affordable housing, but a range of affordable housing to those with the highest need and lower income to middle income households as well. And through our deeper affordability requirements and the introduction of income averaging, we can help serve low-income New Yorkers who need the most affordable housing. So here you can see, I keep going too fast. Here you can see an example of how UAP could work, right? This is a church that I believe is located in Community District 4. And this church is located in an R6 district, right? They want to build affordable housing today. They'd get 3.0 FAR, regardless of whether they're developing market rate units, affordable units, whatever it is, it's 3.0 FAR. That would allow them on this site to build about 35 units. Under the universal affordability preference, they'd get a small bump to 3.9 FAR. But the additional 0.9 FAR could only be used for affordable housing. Again, permanently affordable housing. If it is, then they could build about 10 to 12 more affordable units on a site like this. Again, this goes to the breadth of the proposal citywide. 10 to 12 units doesn't seem like a lot on one site, but it's functioning at a citywide scale, right? And so every project has a few more affordable units. New York City can add a significant amount of affordable housing, and no single neighborhood will experience drastic aesthetic changes or overtaxed infrastructure. And here you could see the kind of illustration of what UAP may look like in some of our neighborhoods. Without UAP, the building is built according to the base FAR for market rate housing, right? So the result on the left side of the screen here is an 8-story apartment building. With UAP, if you look on the right side of the screen, the building could be about 20% larger, which for this example translates to an additional 2 stories. But again, that additional space is reserved for permanently affordable housing. That'll be recorded on the deed of the property in perpetuity. And we think this is going to be significant. In fact, we did a bit of a look back and we thought, if UAP had been in place since 2014, we did some calculations. We've determined that an additional 20,000 income-restricted affordable homes could have been created in just that time period. And that could have housed about 50,000 New Yorkers and put a really significant dent in our housing crisis. There we go. So, MIH. Will MIH continue to be mapped? Will it continue to exist? Yes, absent UAP. So, mandatory inclusionary housing would remain in place. It's an important tool for us. It would continue to be mapped when there are significant increases in residential density, just as it exists today. But the proposal would introduce some improvements to MIH as it currently exists. First, under this proposal, MIH option 3, which is kind of known today as the deep affordability option, that could be mapped and applied as a standalone option. It wouldn't be one of a number of other options. We know that deep affordability is a preferred option for many neighborhoods, and we think that it could be useful in many rezonings to be applied as essentially the only option there. It has to be applied today as an alternate with MIH options 1 and 2. So allowing it to be standalone would allow future actions to ensure deeper affordability where MIH is allowed. Additionally, some MIH FARs would be raised to meet the UAP FARs in the instances where they're a little bit lower. So in a lot of districts, you'll have your base FAR, you'll have your MIH FAR, and you'll have your senior housing FAR. The senior housing is the highest. What we want to do is allow the MIH FAR to basically map that senior housing FAR to ensure that affordable and supportive housing would be permitted. I want to, again, re-emphasize that market rate FARs would not change as a part of this. However much market rate floor area is permitted now, that is what would be permitted after the fact. Finally, the current MIH program is not always compatible with tools that create affordable home ownership. So this proposal would exempt 100% affordable home ownership projects from some of those rules that prevent them from penciling out when there's incompatibilities between the zoning resolution and some of the term sheets from HPD. And what are our citywide proposals that are in low density and medium and high density neighborhoods? I'll go into them a bit here. jumped the gun a little. Here we go. Third time's a charm. So we want to make parking optional in new buildings, right? So what we have today is a city in which new housing must include off-street parking in many neighborhoods, even where it's not needed. These are areas that are near transit. These are areas that are highly walkable. And a lot of times, this required parking often goes unutilized, right, or significantly underutilized. These mandates for parking, as they exist today, they mean less space for housing and increased construction costs that often get passed down to tenants in their rents, right? And that results in less housing being built overall a lot of times. So the diagrams on this slide represent how parking takes up a ton of space, right? 2 parking spaces is roughly equivalent to the size of a studio apartment. Building parking itself is also really expensive, and it's an obstacle to housing growth, and especially affordable housing growth. This proposal prioritizes housing over parking, right? We want to make sure people have housing, and we'll make sure that, cars, they'll have their housing, they'll have their parking where necessary, but we believe that the market can actually control that a little bit more efficiently than the existing situation that we have right now. A lot of the additional costs for providing parking tend to be passed down to tenants through their rents. Parking would still be allowed, right? We want to emphasize that. We anticipate that developers will respond to market needs and continue to provide parking in areas where there is demand. In fact, we have several examples of low-density neighborhoods in which new projects are built, in which developers are building far in excess of our minimum parking requirements now. And to that sends the message that our parking minimums aren't really what's making these developers build the parking, it's the demand. People don't want to live in a neighborhood far from transit that's inaccessible if they're not going to have parking available. And what we found, again, parking requirements have been eliminated in many cities across the United States, and it's actually been very successful. And there's still been parking provided by the market with demand as it's appropriate rather than by a mandate. So here's an example of kind of something that we think could be very helpful. So this example shows how lifting that parking mandate can support housing growth. The developer sees this underutilized lot. It's in a great location. It's near transit. They say, I want to build an apartment building. The lot could accommodate 16 homes right now, but the developer stops at just 10 because once they build the 11th unit, then they need to add all this parking, right? As soon as they add that 11th unit, they would need to provide 6 parking spaces, whether or not they anticipate that those 6 spaces would actually be utilized. They just need to add them. By eliminating that parking mandate and making it optional, the developer can fully build out the lot to include those 6 additional apartments, right? To make it a 16-unit building rather than 10. Again, 6 units, is that a big deal on one lot? Maybe not, but when you add this citywide, we really could see a significant impact and a significant addition of supply. Here we go. And here's some additional changes that we're making citywide, right, and on a wider range of housing types. Our proposal is intended not only to add housing, period, but to add a wider range of housing types for people in different living situations who have different needs. First, conversions, right? We have outdated rules right now that prevent underused and underutilized non-residential buildings like offices from converting to housing. For example, we have many buildings that were constructed after 1961 or are located outside the city's largest office centers, and today they just can't be converted to housing. There's no way for it to be permitted, and so we want to help rectify that. What we also want to do is make it easier for and to do this, what we would do is make a few changes to adaptive reuse regulations. First, the proposal would expand the regulations citywide to go beyond office districts. That way, a broader range of underutilized buildings, like vacant schools, vacant former religious buildings, could be converted into housing where appropriate. And second, what we want to do is move the eligibility cutoff date from 1961 or 1977, depending on the situation, to 1991. Currently, only buildings that were constructed before 1961 are eligible for this adaptive reuse to residential, and we want to make more recently constructed buildings eligible. Third, the proposal would enable conversions of all types of housing, including supportive housing, shared housing, dorm-style housing, because a lot of times these existing floor plates don't really make sense to convert to maybe a standard traditional dwelling unit that you may see. As shown in the second image here in the middle, the proposal also aims to allow more small and shared apartments by eliminating the dwelling unit factor, right? And this is a measure of the minimum average unit size in areas with good transit access. This will provide more housing opportunities for New Yorkers who want to live alone but do not have that option today, right? Currently, we force too many people who would like to live alone to find roommates, and a lot of times these roommates occupy the existing family-sized units, right? A lot of times they don't even want to live with the roommates in those units. They would like to live alone. They maybe don't have a whole lot of needs. They want a simple, smaller unit, and they'll be able to free up some of those family-sized homes for larger families who really need them. We hope that this can relieve some of the pressure, right? And finally, previous developments often took place under tower in the park style regulations called height factor. And although DCP has developed a more recent set of regulations for contextual buildings that have height limits and result in better designs, this is referred to as quality housing, which many of you are aware of, a lot of sites, including campuses such as NYCHA campuses, cannot access those new rules to build quality housing. So the proposed changes would allow height-limited infill on appropriate sites that would otherwise be forced to develop tall, skinny buildings or nothing at all. So finally, I want to go over some of the timeline here. We referred to this to the community board at our review session last week on April 29th, and it was officially transmitted, I believe, on the 8th, or would be transmitted on the 8th. So what we have now is a 60-day review period up until we want to kind of gather as much input as we can from our community boards and other organizations. The public hearing is scheduled right now sometime in July. We don't have a specific date. Our recommendation would be to try to get that recommendation from a community board into us by July 8th. If you're able to do so by July 8th, which roughly is around the same time as boards begin to go on recess, we can ensure that that will be transmitted fully in time for it to be fully considered by both the CPC and the City Council. If you cut it after July 8th, it may or may not be able to be reviewed in time. It kind of depends when the public hearing is, so you're taking a bit of a risk. And then after the public hearing in July, the City Planning Commission vote will be in September, after a lot of the boards return from recess. After the City Planning Commission vote, if the CPC votes to approve, there will be a 50-day clock, and the City Council would vote, and we're eyeballing that to be completed by the end of the calendar year, 2024. And that's about that for me. I really appreciate you listening. I know that was a long proposal. There's a lot of density in here, no pun intended. But we're really excited about these proposals, and we think it could do quite a bit for housing. And I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
All right, thank you. Questions for the Department of City Planning, beginning with, from Borough Board members and starting with Chairperson Scavo.
The accessory dwelling units, single-family, two-family home, is there restrictions, rear yard? Would there be a restriction in the square footage of the
Oh, yes, please, would you please speak into the mic for the recording?
Would there be a size defined in the ruling? How would you run plumbing there? Does this accessory dwelling unit need separate bathrooms, separate kitchen? What are the limitations?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So the question again was, what are the restrictions for ADUs, both in construction and ensuring that they're livable, plumbing, so on and so forth? So there would be restrictions, certainly. There would be an 800 square foot maximum for these accessory dwelling units. They're not designed to be massive homes. They're designed to, again, help with that missing middle. There would be regulations requiring that new ADUs, if they're detached, like in the rear yard here, they would not be permitted to be any closer to side or rear lot lines than 5 feet. There would need to be a 5-foot setback from any lot line that you have there. As for other and I believe there would be a 2-story maximum as well for any detached building, right? If it's attached, a lot of times what we see is conversions of existing garages, basements, attics, so on and so forth. Those would be permitted, but they'd still be restricted to 800 square feet. These ADUs, and this is something that we find very important, I think what we've heard from a lot of districts is that, well, there's already all these illegal apartments, right? They're illegal, they're not safe, they're not habitable. And by making a lot of these housing types legal, it requires them to go through the permitting process that we have in New York City already. It requires them to go through DOB inspections. It requires them to go through fire inspections to make sure that there's proper egress and ability for firefighters to get through there. They have to go through inspections to make sure that plumbing is there and that's all habitable. That's outside of the zoning regulation, but we had a working group that met at least once, if not twice or more weekly, with other agencies to ensure that these proposals were safe and that any new ADUs that were allowed went through the entire gamut of our zoning regulations to make sure they're safe and habitable.
And what would be the 5-foot clearance? Is that 5 feet from the rear of the home, the existing home?
Oh, no. So that would be 5 feet from any property line.
Okay. If you have an existing home, how many feet would it be from the rear of the existing home clearance before the ADU?
I know that there's a regulation there. I want to say 10 feet. I will get back to you with that specific number. I know that there is a requirement there.
I would assume. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chairperson Daley, Community Board 17, and we're recognizing your being here.
Thank you. Well, I have a number of questions, but I'm going to start with 2 and then obviously give the floor, the other opportunity, and I'll come back to me, if you don't mind, Councilor Lewis.
Certainly, Chairperson.
In Community Board 17, we have a serious issue of an oversaturation of development. You're now proposing like a free-for-all in Community Board 17. How as a board can we regulate the number of apartment buildings that are going up? Because one, we have a number of them right now that are underutilized because they're too expensive for individual, and I heard you keep using the term affordable. And I could give you a testimony of a person who said they had an affordable studio for $1,900. She's 22 years old, right? So the question again is, what are we looking at? We always hear the term affordable, but we don't hear a number, right? So we would like to have a number attached to affordable, not just the words affordable housing, right? That's one. The consideration about parking, I don't want to use a bad word because I'm from a Christian home, but the consideration about parking and not parking is BS. In our community is absolutely no parking. Absolutely none. I have the fight of the bus lanes that takes up parking. I have the fight of the bike racks that are taking up parking. I have the fight of the zip cars that are taking up parking. I have the fight of the constant no standing signs that's taking up parking. And now you're going to tell me that in this plan, you plan to remove the necessity for parking. I don't think that is a great idea. Now I have more, but I'm going to leave here for you to answer those 2 questions. Directly, what is affordability? Maybe, I don't know, having incentives for these apartments already to make them affordable so people can actually live there instead of building more. And 2, please stop saying that parking is not a commodity. It is very necessary. And I know other community boards have the same issue.
I appreciate the questions. I'll first address the affordability questions. So we're under no illusions that the current AMI system is perfect. We're under no illusions that the current affordability, the capital A affordability as determined, is perfect as it stands right now. What we do have control over within the Department of City Planning is some of our zoning regulations, right? Now, we're working with HPD, we're working with HCD as well, you know, state programs as well that are kind of outside of our purview. And what they've often told us and what we've said and what they've said to us is kind of what I said at the beginning, which is zoning reform is not sufficient to solve our housing crisis. A lot of that depends on exactly the issue you're talking about, addressing that AMI issue, addressing affordability levels. However, coming up with new programs to ensure deeper affordability is very, very difficult, if not impossible, without some zoning reform, right? They're saying, well, sure, we could come up with new programs, but spend all this time and resources coming up with these new programs when the buildings couldn't even be built, right? So what we are hoping to do is actually at least help a little bit some of the affordability, right? Getting it down to 60% AMI. Is it perfect? No, certainly not perfect, right, as it stands right now. We'd also like a little bit deeper affordability, but this is kind of what we have under our control right now. We're continuing to work with HPD and other programs to make sure that there are additional housing types and affordability programs in place. Unfortunately, what we have right now is our control is limited, right? So what we have control is over what can be built and how it can be built. As for parking, we are under no illusion that parking is not necessary citywide. Of course it is, in many, many locations. And what we anticipate, and this is based on a lot of our research that we found in cities across the country, and cities, in fact, across the world, is that the market is actually pretty good at determining where parking is necessary and where it may be superfluous, right? In a lot of our downtown locations, which are near job centers, near transit, very accessible, we've seen parking lots and parking garages go significantly underutilized. It's just empty space in a basement a lot of times. However, when we get to low-density districts, many of which are in CD17, we said, yeah, actually, people do need parking in a lot of these areas. They're either not near transit or they're occupied by folks who aren't able to use transit effectively, whatever it may be. And what we've seen, again, through our research in other cities, as well as our research in New York City from new developments over providing parking above the minimum, basically points to developers saying, no one's going to rent these units if we don't provide parking. We're going to provide them ourselves, right? And so that's what we anticipate to happen.
Chairperson Baptiste.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I think one of the concerns, among the many concerns I have is, so I think that by incentivizing all this development, what we're also doing is, I mean, what's being done in terms of the protection of current housing stock? Because I think when we start putting these houses on the market and we're incentivizing these and housing becomes a commodity, you kind of encourage sellers to say, well, listen, if I have a developer who's going to buy my property for $3 or $4 million, then why not? And we're losing affordable housing stock. So the places that used to be affordable, all of a sudden we lose those, and we get some of these housing options that you're talking about, where maybe a few of the options might be affordable, but the bulk of it usually ends up being market rate. And we've also experienced that in my board, at least, and I think I've seen it in several other boards, where when we increase that stock of market rate, you kind of put that upward pressure on all the other affordable stuff, because now I'm a bargain compared to whatever's a market rate apartment. My concern, and I'm not even sure if there's a question here, but I definitely have concerns about this, because I think we're feeding a beast in terms of we're encouraging all this development, we're encouraging the markets to rise, we're encouraging people to sell high, and those costs always get passed back to the city. Let me ask this question, if anything. There was an average number given with regards to what the average rent is in New York City. Given if all these proposals go through, what do you project the average rent would be? Does it lower the average rent? Or are we fighting for like the same 4 scraps of apartments that are affordable under 60%?
So there's, I think, a conflation there, right? Because there's the average rent that's market rate, and then there was a reference at the end of the 60% AMI. So I want to make sure I'm answering the correct question.
I guess, are we building enough units to bring down the average rent, which is supposed to be the intended effect?
Oh, that's certainly our hope, and that's what we anticipate will occur based on our research in a lot of other places, right? So there's been a wealth of research, particularly in the last 10, 15, 20 years, about how even market rate units bring down rents at a regional level, certainly, and then even more so research that we found that even at a local level, those can bring down rents and are at the very, very least slow rent growth that we've seen. However, in our high-density neighborhoods, again, market rate development, the FAR that's allowed for market rate will not be changing, right? Any additional housing will be required to be affordable. Again, per the previous question, not pretending that affordability as it exists is perfect, but it's still less than what we have in our market rate apartments. And so what we've seen through a wealth of research is that adding apartments at a variety of different income levels will bring down rents at a variety of those different income levels.
Would you be able to provide some of that research? Because I mean, just listen, experientially, I have never seen anybody who said, by the way, these market rate apartments brought down the prices. All we've ever seen is that market rate apartments bring up the rents in every district. If you have that research, that would be helpful for me and my board as we're having conversations, so that way we can really discuss what that means.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I mean, look, anecdotally, I also was skeptical of that as well, right? We go around and we said, oh, wait, there's all these apartments going up, the rent's still high. But when you dig into the research, what we found is actually just the opposite. And despite, kind of going back to my slide earlier, it may seem as if we're adding a lot of housing, but really we haven't added much since the 50s. And so a lot of our research, which we'll be happy to send to everybody here, shows that we can actually really help alleviate with both market rate and affordable housing.
And if I could also ask, does DCP have data with respect to, I guess you had numbers between 2014, I think it was 2014 to current, about the amount of units that were built. Is it possible to get an idea of how many of those units are vacant in terms of what's, between what's been built and what's actually still vacant?
Yes, certainly. So I introduced the vacancy rate previously. It's about 1.27% in Brooklyn. Now, vacancy also is a bit of a nebulous term, right? Not all apartments that aren't currently inhabited are vacant apartments, right? Many of them, there's a lease signed, but folks haven't moved in yet. Many of them need to undergo renovations to become habitable, so on and so forth. And so we can get more information to you very soon about kind of what's included in that vacancy survey and what we have as that vacancies.
Thank you.
Chairperson Lohman?
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for the presentation. I just want to make a few statements. When you speak about parking, the parking is empty because they can't afford it. The prices that you're charging to park your vehicle in these parking lots is too expensive. That's the reason why they're empty. And the parking, like at CB5, parking is of paramount out there. So to say that you're going to allow the developer or whomever to decide whether or not parking is necessary, I think that's a problem to begin with. Not only that, in CB5's area, we're number one, I want to say, in affordable housing in the last 20 years or so. There's some places that haven't put any affordable housing. What are you going to do to kind of even the playing field? I hear you saying affordable. Affordable to who? You have to think about the AMI of the areas that you're building in. I think you said 76,000 to 100 and, what was the number?
Well, it depends what we're referring to. I think that's
AMI, the
average
60%.
AMI for a family of three, yeah.
Yes, it was 100 and what?
I'll find the specific number for you.
So my last point, I think you should think about the areas that you're building in. The 60% of the AMI have to go according to the areas you're building. It can't be citywide. It has to be area-wide, okay? Thank you.
Appreciate the points. First, I'll address parking. I know that's, come up quite a bit. And we're in no way saying that parking is not necessary or that people are, need parking as it to be a luxury. In fact, something that you brought up right there, I think it kind of helps the point, is that there's sometimes empty parking because it's too expensive, right? Well, if the parking is required to be built, that's often included in a lot of tenant lease agreements sometimes that we see. Sometimes it isn't, but a lot of times it is. And so that's something that is often passed through to developers, right? Or passed through to tenants, rather, right? If I'm in one of those buildings and I sign a lease somewhere, whether or not I actually have a parking space or whether or not I actually have a car, I'm basically required to pay for that parking space, right? And so that's something that we want to help alleviate in those neighborhoods where it isn't necessary.
That's not necessarily the case in CB5. In CB5, we have a lot of empty parking lots because they can't afford, not that they're being assigned parking, and we just can't afford it, period. And it remains empty and people park on the street. And then the other component is, then we have DOT, they come and put all of these different medians and take parking spots away, and then people have to park 3, 4, 5 blocks away from where they live, parking is a necessity in CB5.
Understood. I appreciate that.
So just to give members in sense of the order, I continue to see you acknowledging you. We're going to hear from Chairperson Busereth, followed by Chairperson Caesar, followed by First Vice Chair Valles, and then we'll continue. Mr. Daly, you will begin round two, but we'll get through round one as first. So beginning with you, Chairperson Busereth.
Thank you. So first, can you add some color to the phrase "a little more" in every district? Most recently, I heard that there's a 500,000 unit shortage in the city. So does that mean there's going to need to be an average of 8,000 to 10,000 new units in every seat? I think that that kind of information would be useful. And then secondly, universal affordable. Can you just go to that slide?
Sure.
So yeah, go to the Brooklyn one specifically. So
Here we
my
go.
district is highly dark orange in this map. So I'm curious, but I don't understand really how this would be applied, right? So you use the example of the church. So what's the difference between a rebuild, which you said, and then you said for MIH, it's new development. So what is that distinction? And what are specific instances, if you give an example, where UAP could be applied versus MIH?
Right, yeah, thank you for that question. So UAP would be permitted, and maybe this isn't the best graphic, UAP would be permitted as an option in every one of these neighborhoods that are in color right here, whether they're, that light tangerine or the dark orange. Really what this is showing is kind of the status quo, but it's not really showing where UAP would be permitted in the future. And I want to make the distinction between UAP and MIH, which I think is what you were requesting, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yep.
So UAP would be an option, not necessarily mandatory, but we think attractive options that many developers would take advantage of, where you could build, to your base FAR, whatever it may be right now, and there would be roughly a 20% bump in your FAR, but that delta, the difference between the existing and the future bump that would be created through this amendment, would have to all be affordable or supportive housing at that 60% average AMI level, right? So that will be separate from MIH, right? MIH is mapped when we have a rezoning that significantly increases the residential capacity, right? We say, okay, there's many, many more apartments that are going to be permitted on these properties than were previously, so we want to make sure it's mandatory that a certain amount of them are going to be affordable. As many of you know, there are several affordability options in MIH, option 1, 2, 3, 4. And so developers, when they build there, whether it be now, 5 years, 10 years, 30 years in the future, would still need to pick one of those options. Not necessarily 60% AMI, which is from UAP. So that is kind of a distinction there. I hope that clarifies a bit.
Would it be applied in instances when someone is going to rebuild or build as of right, and then they're seeking a bump for FAR, but that FAR is only for permanent affordable?
Right, yeah. So if you're building, let's say you have a zoning district that is how it is. You're not seeking a rezoning, right? You have, I don't know, let's say a high-density district. Let's call it R7A, right? You have an R7A. You come in as a builder, and you say, I want to build this building. You have your base FAR. You got to build to that FAR. You're not in an MIH area, so you don't get that MIH, bump or anything. However, what UAP would say to you is, okay, you can build to your base FAR of market rate housing, just as it was, no affordable requirement. But if you add a little bit more, right, we'll give you a little bit more floor area to work with as long as that extra floor area is restricted permanently to affordable and supportive housing. Nope, the market rate floor area will remain exactly the same, right?
Chairperson Caesar.
Thank you very much for the presentation. And so I have two questions, and I'll try to keep them brief. So the first one is about, as you and your colleagues were doing this planning, have there also been conversations about the potential impacts from the prior approved stuff? So for example, when there was a diagram about the middle housing, I was wondering with that diagram, it's like, okay, I know there's 1 million laundromats on Flatbush that are one level, and I was thinking, okay, per that diagram, maybe 2 or 3 stores get built on top of that, but then there's the economic opportunity that's currently being reviewed by City Council, and if that were approved, that could mean that I could also put another business on top of that, thereby decreasing the amount of total units actually possible. So I'm wondering, has that been in conversation about this not being in vacuum, giving the other stuff that's being reviewed? And then the second question I have too is about also system stuff like capacity and enforcement, because all of this is being proposed within an administration that's looking to cut, and those conversations are still ongoing. And so has scenario planning been done where in the event that these cuts are done this year and future years, what could actually be achieved given the levers that are possible to control compared to if those cuts are not implemented? Thank you.
Understood. Appreciate the question. Good to see you again. So the first question, I believe, I just had it now. Sorry, remind me of the first.
Sure. The first question was about the impacts
Oh,
that the prior
right.
City of Yes items could have on this current stuff.
Understood. Yeah. So that's a question that we've gotten quite a bit, understandably so. The City of Yes proposals are intended to work together, right? They serve different aspects of New York City's needs, right? First one was carbon neutrality. That's certainly a need that we have to reduce our carbon footprint overall as a city. Economic opportunity, we want to make it easier for small business owners to run and operate their businesses. And for housing opportunity, we obviously want to bring costs down and allow people to live in New York City. But they are not necessarily independent of each other, and they are developed by the same folks and the same working groups to make sure they make sense. Now, something specific you brought up, and we've heard it quite a bit of, well, zoning for economic opportunity allowed non-residential space above the ground floor in a lot of these places. And then housing opportunity, you're trying to allow more housing. So how are those not in conflict? Really what we're trying to do is we looked at the breadth of different neighborhoods in New York City and their different market conditions, the different economic conditions, so on and so forth. And as we all know, no neighborhood is equal, right? And so we found that in a lot of areas, there's this underutilized space, right? Whether that underutilized space could reasonably and feasibly, given the market conditions, become housing, that's great. Whether that some market conditions in some situations, we've got underutilized space above the ground floor that, for whatever reason, is not feasible to turn into housing, whether because there's logistical constraints, it doesn't pass DOB or health and safety rules for whatever reason, there's not proper egress, so on and so forth, but they would be permissible for a small business, right, or a production area or something like that. So really we'll want to take advantage of all the space that we have and make sure that it's being utilized in one way or another. And so we think that that could be helpful. Different neighborhoods may have different needs. And your second question, I know I just had it on the tip of my tongue. I keep asking you to recover.
Sure, no worries. And so basically it was about basically scenario planning where if all this happens in a universe where the cuts happen versus one where the cuts don't happen or they happen at a level less than what's currently projected.
Understood, yeah. So enforcement, that's something that's been brought up quite a bit, and we certainly understand that's been a continued headache in a lot of situations, right? We're, first of all, want to just make sure it's explicit that we've worked in really, really significant detail on teams with all members of the rest of our city family, right? And that's the Department of Buildings, that's their enforcement unit, that's fire, that's, you know, DEP to make sure we're having environmental protection, so on and so forth. And what we've also found is we're doing a lot of cleanups here in this code to simplify some of the code sections. Sometimes it doesn't actually change the amount of housing, but it is a simplification. And what we found from talking to our friends at DOB and the enforcement units is that a lot of times they have so much work to do just kind of digging into the actual enforcement situation because the code is so complicated that takes up so much of their time right there. In addition, if we take into account, let's take ADUs for an example, right? We've got, I'm sure many of you have seen in your neighborhoods, a lot of illegal construction, people just kind of picking up a hammer and nail without getting a permit. And that is adding a lot more to our enforcement units, right? They need to go out and inspect all these things and, you know, either shut them down, make sure they get a permit, so on and so forth. By actually providing a legal pathway, we know that they'll be illegal and meet our health and safety standards. This is in this example of ADUs from the get-go, in the beginning, right? And so that actually could decrease the necessity of having so much enforcement actions. And then we can have the enforcement folks like dedicate their time and resources to those other matters that you identify. So that's kind of what we are hoping to do here in large part, but we would love to hear more about kind of your experiences with enforcement as we go through the engagement process.
Okay. Thank you.
First, Vice Chair Vallis.
About 7 years ago, I have a two-family over a store, and each apartment was a three-bedroom apartment. My architect did drawings. We were ready to submit it to DOB for their approval, and we were going to make a four-family instead of a two-family. When he ran it by Department of Finance, they told us that the real estate taxes would triple from what we were paying. That put a stop to whatever we were doing there. With all the expansion that you're talking about, making more housing in single-family houses and multifamily houses, are we opening up the door for Department of Finance to increase real estate taxes to where landlords will not be able to afford the buildings or the additions to what you're proposing here?
Understood. I appreciate the question. So want to first make it very clear that none of the proposals here are required necessary of owners, right? So you do have that opportunity, right? It's not us building something or an obligation that you build. But in your case, right, if you do want to build something like that, I think I can get more detail on that. I think it might have something to do with MDL. Am I misunderstanding you? Yeah, the Department of Finance has their regulations about that. And your question is understood.
Yeah, the only thing that, I'm a landlord, and the only thing that concerns me and troubles me is that landlords are perceived to be greedy, lining their pockets with the poor tenants' money. That's not the case. Why are rents high? We have never dealt into the root issue of why the rents are high. When you're dealing with real estate taxes that are sky high, when you're dealing with water rates, where the water rate now is more expensive than gasoline, when you're dealing with a court system that takes over a year to remove a non-paying tenant, all this adds to the expense of the building and what the landlord needs to maintain and not lose the building. I just want to say that.
Understood. Yeah, and that's a good point and something that I believe he's right there. And that's something that again I want to reemphasize. Zoning reform is not sufficient to solve all of our problems.
But if DOF does increase the real estate taxes to where it doesn't make it feasible, you're going to get very few people doing this.
Understood.
It's a dead issue.
Understood, and that's why we're working with agencies such as DOF, and that's why we ran all these proposals by to say, okay, well, what's actually feasible here, right? There's a reason that we had, some specific numbers, right, incorporated. There's a reason that we had a lot of specificity here is because we had a lot of research done into some of those things and said, well, sure, we could, say that no one could build any housing unless it's, completely free, let's say, right? But that wouldn't be feasible necessarily. So there's a lot of feasibility analysis that came into this, and it will continue to grow as well, right? I know the state and the city have heard from landlords and property owners such as yourselves, and that's another piece of the puzzle that needs to be addressed here. For better or worse, our piece of the puzzle is the zoning, right? And as much as we can come up with, updates to the court system or to property taxes with DOF, none of it really could decrease prices if it's just not allowed to build, period, right? And so that's what we have control over here, and that's what we're seeking to eliminate at least that barrier.
Chairperson Weatherspoon.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions as well. In the reference that, the research that you referenced, what is the projected amount of units that you expect or is expected to be built to reduce the rents all around that you mentioned?
Yeah. Just to clarify, you said how many units would be needed to reduce rents overall? Not how many are projected via the proposal? Just want to clarify the question.
What are you projecting in terms of, because you made the statement that the hope is to reduce rents when you provide this extra housing. So what are you predicting would be the amount of those units that need to be built?
Sure.
And sorry, just to clarify for the record, this is Alex Summer, the
sorry,
director
thank
of the Brooklyn office of the DCP is answering the question.
Thank you, I
Please.
appreciate it. So the current city and state targets are around 500,000 units of housing. This proposal is not aiming to achieve that total number on its own. I want to be clear, and I think David has mentioned this previously, there are things like state programs which are looking to build affordable housing on state public sites through Empire State Development, for example. There are examples where hospitals are doing infill housing, and so on. This proposal, I think it was close to 120,000, was projected based on the zoning changes alone. And so that's not part of the normal HPD or state housing programs.
Thank you. And my second question is regarding the ADU. Since you're allowing 1- and 2-family homes to be able to make this addition, what about the ones that have been illegally created? Do they have the opportunity to legalize?
Yes, we'll be working on we've been working on legalization programs only in certain locations, right? So, for instance, new ADUs would not be permitted in some of our most vulnerable areas, right, those coastal zone areas. So if you try to legalize a basement ADU in a coastal zone area, that may be a problem, right? But if you try to legalize an existing unit elsewhere, we're creating pathways to do that. But again, something that we find beneficial is that if they were illegally created without going through our permitting system, if we provide a pathway to legalization, then we will have the opportunity to inspect them and make sure that they are habitable and that they're safe.
So they won't be fined?
I can get more information, depends on the situation.
Okay.
It would depend on the situation.
Okay.
So Chairperson Morgan, followed by you, Ms. Williams.
Hi, good evening. Are there any changes to the ULUP process that currently exists between city planning and community boards that we should expect as a result of, I guess this is a zoning text amendment, so is there anything that we are currently accustomed to, any projects that currently come before community boards that the zoning would potentially not or take away review from community boards?
So no changes to the existing ULURP process are proposed here. The ULURP process as it stands is set forth in the city charter, not in the zoning resolution.
Okay.
So we don't have control over that regardless. What these updates will do in many situations is allow some of the changes, these modest changes, that would allow them by right in certain cases, if that's kind of your question there.
Yeah.
But no changes to the ULURP process as it exists. Any rezoning would still go through the typical standard ULURP process.
So these are not considered a rezoning. I think my concern, though, with some of what is being presented, currently there's changes that are occurring as of right in some communities. For example, in Brownsville, we have Nehemiah Homes. And so what some of these folks are doing is coming in, they're taking corner properties of Nehemiah, within the Nehemiah community, and then they're building these 3- and 4-story buildings, understanding that, some of the Nehemiah buildings have a lot of air rights and could be developed, but these folks are coming in and basically changing a historic neighborhood, not putting any thought, dropping 3-story buildings right in the middle of 2 Nehemiah homes, and it really does change, I think, the landscape of communities. And I don't know that that is necessarily being presented in these presentations, the City of Economic Opportunity, as well as now the housing. I think the bigger picture is not being presented, so we don't really know what our neighborhoods would look like if this plan is sort of fully developed, So in 10 years, what does this look like in our communities? Because we now know, we know what downtown Brooklyn looks like, right, after, all the development. It took 20 years, and so now we see all of these big buildings. We see a lot of affordable housing. Please let us know, what is our community going to look like after this? At the very beginning of your presentation, you shared that when mandatory inclusionary housing was adopted, that there was some lost opportunity, that I guess this, in terms of the affordable units, you said, I think, like 50,000 units addition could have been built?
It was 20,000 units for
20,000
50,000
units,
families. was the
okay,
number just-
could have been built. And so even when City of Yes economic opportunity was presented, that was my biggest concern, is that you guys are pushing this agenda forward with these, back then that was a big thing, mandatory inclusionary housing, and that was supposed to be good for us. And I raised the concern about letting us know where you made the mistake, not you per se, but whoever was leading the charge at that time. Was there a mistake made? Because here you are coming back to us, 7, 8 years later, and saying, here's a new plan, and now you're saying, oh, there was some missed opportunities. And so I think this needs to, we need to see what the bigger picture is for our community, because it can't be that, we're constantly picking up the burden, right, of some mayoral administration's mistake. That's not fair to the people who live in communities and who sustain them. It's exhausting to us.
Understood. I appreciate that. There's a few things I'd like to bring up, and I certainly understand the changes to neighborhoods here. First of all, and this may or may not have been the case in the Nehemiah homes, we're well aware of that situation, but just in other areas, we want to maintain and be sure that when it comes to aesthetic changes to an historic neighborhood, historic districts and landmark districts, they still retain their right and their kind of ownership there in terms of that regulation. So nothing being proposed as part of the zoning resolution will usurp the role of the Landmarks Preservation Commission, right? And so, again, may not have been the case in Nehemiah homes, but I do want that to be stated for everybody here. LPC will still have their kind of ownership of that part of the process. When it comes to different, what the neighborhoods will look like, that's a very, legitimate point. And I think something that you brought up was, when you looked at downtown Brooklyn after some of the zoning changes, and I think that's really one of the reasons that we wanted to make this a citywide change, right? We looked at some neighborhoods. Now, downtown Brooklyn is kind of its own thing, but we looked at some neighborhoods, and actually, if I go back, if I'm able to, we can see that, certain neighborhoods have added a ton of new housing, and others have not added a ton of new housing. And, this is, we think, in large part because, let me see if I can get it there so we can all look at the same thing. Here we go. So you can see the darker blue neighborhoods have added really a significant amount of new housing from 2010 to 2023, and the other neighborhoods may not have added a lot of new housing. Now, when we spread out the potential housing growth across the entire city, some of those darker blue areas may not need to take the brunt or the significant amount of that new housing, because really there's significant demand. And so when people are saying, where can we build housing? Well, it can't be here, can't be here, can't be here. They all tend to go to one place. And we think that that's really a big impact of why neighborhoods have aesthetically changed so significantly, right? When we're able to spread it across the city, an ADU here, another story there, another 2 stories in a high-density area, nothing extreme. We're not proposing that a single-family district could all of a sudden add a 12 or 14-story building. That's not part of this. We think that when we can spread it across, we can significantly limit the aesthetic changes. Not to mention that a lot of buildings in the city, and especially in our lower density neighborhoods, are exactly the type of buildings that we want to permit today, right? A lot of the I think that there's kind of this concept, understandably so, that the zoning resolution as it stands today is what preserves neighborhood character, right? That's what preserves our aesthetics. And really what we found is, if anything, it actually doesn't, because a lot of what's allowed by the zoning resolution today doesn't actually match the existing character, right? And so what we want to do is allow those buildings that already exist in a lot of those areas to take advantage and to be able to still be built the same way that they were several years ago. There was a final point that you had there that I can't quite put my finger on. Yes, it was, right, updating MIH and some of the lost opportunity there. So I want to be clear again, and I've been moving all over this place, but basically I think the number that I presented here a little bit later was not necessarily intended to say that, you know, MIH has been a failure. We understand it's not perfect, obviously. Very little, here we go. But really what we're trying to do is show that if we had the proposal in place that we're, let me see if I can get here. Here we go. So at the bottom of the screen here, this is not really speaking to MIH necessarily. This is speaking to if we had the proposal in place that we're proposing right now and that we're presenting, if this had been in place since 2014, we could have seen an additional 20,000 income restricted affordable homes, right? And this slide, I think, also speaks to some of what may change in your neighborhood, right? And what we think here is, obviously, this is a unique district. Not all of your districts look like that. Very understandable. But if you're in a district that may have housing typologies that look like that, on the left is kind of what's permitted to be built today, and on the right is what could be permitted in the future. I want to also state that an EIS, a full environmental impact statement, was performed as a part of this proposal that went into detail not only on infrastructure concerns and feasibility, but also did a lot of analysis on things like shadow impacts, did a lot of analysis on things like aesthetic impacts, changes to neighborhood character and historic districts and things like that. And I think what they found was approximately 2 to 4 units could be projected per acre, something like that. Yeah, I think, and it really what we looked at is, okay, as I believe a previous speaker said, these things take time, or you might have said it, these things take time, right, to truly be implemented. Our environmental impact statement took in a 15-year time frame, understanding that things take a lot of time. And what we saw is that roughly, this is an estimation, obviously a lot of other factors come into play, there would be approximately 2 to 4 new homes per acre over a 15-year period, right, which we think to be relatively modest compared to, you know, having a new high-rise apartment building, you know, every couple of days or something like that. And so that's kind of the intent. If we spread it across the city, there's moderate impact, but when you add it all together, it's significant. And I'll just add, in the EIS, I believe that there are also massing models showing what's permitted today and what would be permitted in the future in different neighborhoods, low density, high density, everything in between.
And that environmental impact study is publicly available?
Yes, it's publicly available on our website right now. We'd be happy to forward that to everyone afterwards.
Ms. Williams, on behalf of Councilmember Mealy.
Just curious, with all the studies that you do, are you considering people's mental health and the environment that you're creating by blocking everybody's sunlight and all these other things that are happening? Like on my block alone, they built a building. I live on a block where they're all houses. I can't sit on my stoop and get sun. People need that. The trees need that. People need that for their mental health and stability. Aside from that, you're creating an environment that's going to keep inviting things we don't want, like rats. The more darkness that we have, the more darkness we will have. So I don't understand why we're not taking this into consideration.
I appreciate the question. I think I would point again to the environmental impact statement, which does take into account shadow impacts. It does take into account other aesthetic impacts. It takes into account urban design. That obviously has a big impact on our mental health. And that's a very significant concern we have. But what, of course, also has a big impact on mental health is one's ability to afford their homes, right? And so that's something that we need to address as well. And so there's a lot of things that we need to balance and understand. And I'm very sorry to hear, you know, about, you know, the darkness and the shadows on your property and on other places.
It's not just my house. That's what I'm saying
understand.
to you. So how are we expecting people to thrive when we are taking away the natural things that people need to thrive?
Understood the question. Yeah, I'll reiterate that that is taken into account in our environmental studies, just as it is with everything. And if it's insufficient, we're happy to hear more from you over the public review process. But again, when it comes to mental health, sunlight is definitely important, right? As are, noise impacts, so on and so forth.
So are trees, which need that sun as well.
Absolutely, which is why we've been working with other agencies, including, environmental protection, including parks and rec, to make sure that these proposals do make sense, right? And that they aren't infringing on our open spaces, right? On our parks, on our street trees will still have their opportunity to thrive and survive in New York City. But again, I will point to, those are all things that are significantly impacting mental health. You're absolutely right. But what also impacts mental health is people being shoved into a shelter system because they have nowhere to live, right? Or people being forced to move out of New York City away from their friends and family because they have nowhere to thrive. And so there's a lot of things that impact our mental health, including and especially some of the items you brought up. But housing is also part of that, right? And so we're trying to find a way to allow modest increases that have what we believe to be, given some of our studies, modest aesthetic changes in different neighborhoods that hopefully will not have severe impacts on sunlight or other aspects that also allow people to live in New York City and to do so without breaking the bank.
Chairperson Mujica Diaz. You're the last person who has not yet had an opportunity to speak. We will go to a second round of questions if anyone has.
So first of all, to the Borough
So
President.
far.
Thank you,
Sorry,
sir.
please.
First of all, to the Borough President's office, we should limit time on presentations, especially when they're coming to each community board to make the same exact presentation. That's just my personal opinion. I think others feel the same. I'm all about housing, especially, with the homeless situation we have here. I lost a lot when Sandy came to my home, so I know how it is to feel. But with that being said, affordable housing is not what you people are saying is affordable. A person, once they're accepted into the program and they pass that good almighty dollar, they now go to market rate, which means now they're back into square one. We need to fix HPD in order to continue to discuss revisiting rezoning. The problem is with HPD, not with rezoning. So we need to fix that, because once you get into one of these apartments and you make that extra dollar tomorrow, you now go into market rate, and now that person needs to move out and they're back in the same situation. You guys are failing to tell people that. Not making parking mandatory to these buildings is going to be a disaster. With congestion pricing arriving soon, people are going to need these parking spaces, and we need parking spaces mandatory in all buildings. That's just my comment. Thank you.
Understood. I appreciate that. The first thing you brought up is that, we need to really address HPD situations. I believe you said something about that. Yeah. And I'm happy to go on more of it.
So I just want to clarify, there's a lot of different affordability programs that have different kind of income requirements. For example, NYCHA, public housing, does have your rent tied directly to changes in your income. We know that's one type of housing program. In inclusionary housing developments that get a zoning incentive or a zoning requirement through MIH, or voluntary inclusionary housing, or future UAP, does not have that type of requirement. So nobody gets kicked out of their house.
I didn't say they get kicked out, I said the rate goes higher.
Yeah.
If you can afford it, you can stay.
Yeah, I just want to clarify, that is,
Rent to square one.
rent goes up. I believe it's tied to inflation, but it is not tied to, and the Rent Guidelines Board, but it is not tied to your income once you're in the affordable housing development. I just want to clarify that.
And I'll add also, I brought up the concept of missing middle housing, right, which is a concept many people are familiar with, and it's exactly targeting what you're talking about, right? We've got folks who qualify for affordable housing at certain income levels, showing their income. We've got folks that are very wealthy who can afford all the market rate housing that, as it's currently at, whatever level it is. And then we have folks that are just above that affordability threshold but can't afford a lot of the market rate units. That's that missing middle. right? And that's what we're hoping to address with a lot of these programs.
Is there any other Borough Board member who has not yet had an opportunity to ask questions or make a comment who wishes to do so? If not, I will move on to the second round. Two folks have indicated a desire to ask further questions or make further comments. Any other member not yet had a chance to speak would like to do so? Hearing none. Round two, Chairperson Daley.
One, again, I go back to our concern in CV17, that there's not equality on the map when we look at housing and what you plan to build. 17 is saturated, actually oversaturated with development. And so we would like in 17 to stop, right? Stop a lot of the development that's going on. How would like to do that? One is to look at the apartments that we have already, I think somebody brought it up, that are vacant, right? Because I want to let everybody know something. In the last 20 years, we have lost 3 congressional seats, which means that approximately 1.5 million people have left New York. With 1.5 million people approximately leaving New York, where did they used to live? What has happened is that New York has become overly expensive for people to live in, so now we want to create these apartments whereas they're completely other vacant apartments. So I think the city needs to start working, one, right, with landlords, right, to make the affordability of their homes affordable before we talk about affordable housing, right? So the first vice chair brought up the fact, if I build, my taxes go up. That means I have to charge high rent, right? So now we're back to square one. Secondly, I have a tenant. I had a tenant on a personal note. I lost $11,000. It wasn't high rent. It was $1,800 a month for a 2-bedroom in Bed-Stuy. The person couldn't pay the rent. We worked with the person, but however, the person couldn't pay the rent. It took over a year to get the person out. We still had a mortgage that we had to pay. So we're saying to the city, also, when we ask them to build and have tenants who can't pay rent because the rent is too high and we have no choice, that you also need to work with landlords. Either A, work with them to give them grants, whatever it is, to help them while this person is in dire straits, or make it easier to remove tenants, right? One out of the two. I would rather not remove a tenant, but I'd rather not lose my house either, right? Because I worked hard, and I personally believe in generational wealth, and I have 5 kids, okay? And I'm trying to prepare something for them to move forward, right, when I move on. That's one. So the second point, that was kind of like point 1 and 2. So therefore, the third point that I just want to bring up real fast, that I need that map, because when you come to my board, I'm going to tell you up front. I'm telling you just very straightforward. When you come to my board, they're going to look at you and say, what happened to the rest of Brooklyn? What happened to the rest of Manhattan? What happened to the rich people area? Why they're not getting developed? So before you get roasted at my board, I'm going to tell you up front, before you get roasted, you're going to have to show where there is equality and equity in the dumping of the building. I use the word dumping because in certain communities there is dumping of buildings. So I'm warning you, right? And I know you're supposed to come to my board this month. So I hate to, and please do not say anything that you're not going to provide parking, Please don't do it. I'm telling you up front. Those are two things I'm warning you of up front. All right? Thank you.
Appreciate that. Might have been late. I was actually CD 17. Yes, sir. I was there on Thursday. So, so a couple things you brought up that I want to address. First of all, equality, right, and equity. You talked about CD 17 being saturated, right? And we could see again right here. You could see CD 7. I know it's a little bit faint, but you could see CD 17 is a slightly darker color, right? You've got certainly a lot of housing. If you've produced a lot of housing here and you think this is oversaturated, this proposal's for you. Because what we're trying to do is spread things out, right? What we have now is a situation in which the demand is being targeted only to certain situations.
You're continuously building, right? So we need for it to stop building, move someplace else. When that gets saturated, they come back.
Understood.
That's what I'm saying.
Understood. I appreciate that. So, again, I want to emphasize, and I know you know this, but I think it's important to state it, DCP, we don't build anything, right? We're talking about what's being permitted. There's a lot of places in the city where things are permitted and they're not built, right? Because of many conditions outside our control, right? Market forces, political, whatever, all those other things. And what we're doing is saying we're looking at every single neighborhood, especially those that are at a lighter color here, right, that have not produced a ton of housing, and saying you need to do your part too. Because when they don't do their part, districts such as CD 17, they're taking all the housing, right? All the development is going there. And so easing some of that market pressure by spreading it out across the city is something that we think could result in less of those high rises, less of that significant aesthetic change to your neighborhood, right? That's what we anticipate would occur here. And so that's a big part of why we're proposing to make this citywide. Otherwise, it could have been different neighborhood rezonings, but we don't want to do that here. We recognize that every neighborhood has its ability to do its part on a small scale. Something else you brought up. First of all, you brought up the 3 congressional seats have been lost, right? I think that's an important point to make, right? If we fail to build new housing, we fail to allow people to live here, to continue to live here, to move here, New York is going to be underrepresented. And you brought up vacancies, right? You brought up vacancies. That's something else that we found. I brought up the numbers of vacancies previously, and when there are so few vacancies, it makes it a situation where tenants have to compete with each other. You brought up taxes, tenant protections, the court system, legitimate. And to that, I'd again go to the point that zoning reform is insufficient but absolutely necessary, right? There's no way to affordability from a landlord's point of view, from a tenant's point of view, from a public sector agency's point of view without zoning reform. It's absolutely necessary. It's one piece of the puzzle, but it is necessary.
But it's not really answering. I understand, I hear you, but it's not really answering the question, right? The question is about that part of my question, right, is about identifying currently the available apartments that are in districts that, and I'm sure, and I know it's not just mine, right? I know it's not just mine, that are vacant, and identifying those and have conversations with the landlord to provide some kind of debt relief, whatever needs to happen, so that we don't have to continue always building, but can utilize the vacant apartments that are there. And I know many in my district because of affordability. It's not affordable. So you're still going back to we need to build, when it might not be necessary to build because we already have a certain number of units that are underutilized. So that's something, what I'm saying. But you keep going back to that's why we need to build. And I keep saying, let's utilize what we have.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's two different comments. I just want to be clear.
Understood. I appreciate the clarification. Both necessary. Both necessary. You're absolutely correct. They're both necessary. And what we have control over here is the zoning resolution, and that's what we can identify as a burden and a barrier to a lot of housing development and high prices. But that's something that we're continually working towards as a city and as a state, is to alleviate some of the issues you brought up so that vacant apartments that are available to rent and that are safe and habitable can be rented to folks.
I'm going to actually go, Chairperson Baptiste, to Mr. Cerna, who has not yet had opportunity to speak. Mr. Cerna, on behalf of Councilmember Aviles.
I'll be brief, and you don't have to answer me now because I know you're coming to CB7. But I didn't hear if you could expand about the transition districts with industrial manufacturing areas, because our district, that entire working waterfront is in industrial areas, and we have seen as folks move into those areas, there's conflicts between. A prime example is like a bakery where it has to get its goods out at 3 in the morning, and folks is like, I can't sleep because there's so much activity happening on it. So if you could, when you come to CB7, just be prepared to like expand upon how this is going to interact with the working industrial waterfront, which is something that, you know, the council member does support and wants to see more of, but as we know, sometimes conflicts with residential.
Understood. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Chairperson Baptiste.
I'll be very brief. In the interest of time, as you're going to the boards, I wanted to know where would we direct, if we had a questionnaire that we would like to provide to DCP so that way you could answer those questions when you come, where would we direct that information? Or what's the contact for that?
Yeah, what we're doing is we've had a lot of contact with district managers as well as certain chairs. We've made an effort to try to meet with folks just informally even before some of the formal presentations on a more casual basis to kind of understand what the board needs to see. And so a lot of times I would recommend, we can give our information here as well, but we'd recommend that you contact your district manager who tends to have a relationship with our office. Send over as long a list of questions that you have, and we can make sure that we can answer as many as possible before a meeting.
You will receive it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Does any other Borough Board member wish to ask questions or make comments to the Department of City Planning? Hearing none. And for marathon endurance, we thank you, the Department of City Planning, for your presentation, and we will close that agenda item. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
So as we move on, just to sort of confirm something with you all, this is a presentation before the Borough Board. The Borough Board has its own independent right to weigh in on land use matters. For example, the Borough Board has given recommendations. I've not heard any, it's not on the agenda, so you'd have to make a motion, and I take it from the temperature in this room that folks have, consistent with practice, the chairs have used this as an opportunity to prime the Department of City Planning for questions in anticipation of presentations before their individual boards and individual board votes. Likewise, the council members, I think, are deferring to individual council member, individual community board process. That's all right. I just want to flag that if a Borough Board member would like to have a Borough Board specific vote to meet the timeline, it would have to take place presumably by the June Borough Board meeting. I'm just sort of confirming the temperature of the room that there is no desire for the Borough Board, independent of the community boards, to weigh in, and I take it that the council members, they would not be the ability to pass that motion anyway, independent of the community boards, but are deferring to the community boards and the community board process. So I just wanted to confirm that. Chairperson Daley.
If I wanted to make a motion now regarding a specific piece, primarily parking, would I be allowed to do that?
You may make any motion, have to be second, and then we'd have to take it from there.
I would like to make a motion that the Borough Board remove the concept of no parking. I would like to make a motion that that DCP remove the concept of no parking from the presentation, and that parking will be part of the planning of any development as is right now.
Just to be clear, Chairperson Daley, your motion is for the Borough Board, to pass a resolution calling upon the Department of City Planning to do the
Yes.
things with parking.
Yes.
So be clear.
Yes.
All right, Chairperson Daley has made a motion that the Borough Board pass a resolution requesting the Department of City Planning remove from its presentation all references to parking.
No parking.
All references to no parking as part of the City of Yes housing opportunity presentation. All right. Is anyone seconding that motion? Chairperson Lohman, you're seconding the motion. We're going to do a roll call vote. I'll run the roll call on this. Say it again? Oh, sorry, that's 100% correct. Motion's been made and seconded. Discussion. Go ahead. Chairperson Baptiste, your discussion point?
Yeah, I think this would be a good opportunity for us to go to our boards. I think we're going to get some additional information and make this, make it a vote. Again, not that I oppose this, but I think this might be something that we'd want to go back to our community, our respective boards.
To be clear, Chairperson Baptiste, are you making a preferred motion to table the vote on the motion for a Borough Board resolution to the next meeting, to a date certain?
Mr. Chair, you read my mind, yes.
Yes, but did you open this conversation by saying we were going to table this to the June meeting?
I didn't make a motion, I made a suggestion, but that such a motion has been made. Is it second?
Yes, second.
Chairperson's, no, this is a motion to table. It is preferred.
Second Fred's motion.
Sure. Chairperson Baptiste's motion is to table a discussion, or rather a vote on Chairperson Daly's motion for the Borough Board to pass a resolution requesting that DCP remove no parking from its presentations. That is a motion to table to a date certain. Motions to table take precedence over continuing debate because they determine whether debate happens. On that, the motion to table, I'll call a roll call vote. The roll call vote, Chair, Community Board number 1. Well, we're going to find out if we're going to, right now. I will find out whether we have a quorum. I will find out if we have a quorum, but if we don't have a quorum, there's something else that we're going to be doing. Community Board number 1. Community Board number 2. Community Board number 3. Community Board number 4. Community Board number 5. Community Board number 6. Community Board number 7. Community Board number 8. Community Board number 9. Community Board number 10. Community Board number 11. Community Board number 12. Community Board number 13. Community Board number 14. Community Board number 15. Community Board number 16. Community Board number 17. Community Board number 18. Councilmember Ressler, 33. Councilmember Gutierrez, number 34. Councilmember Hudson, 35. Councilmember Osei, 36. Councilmember Nurse, 37. Councilmember Aviles, 38. Yes. Councilmember 39, Hanif. Councilmember 40, Joseph. Councilmember Mealy, 41. Councilmember Banks, 42. Yes. Councilmember Schwang, 43. Councilmember Yeager, 44. Councilmember Louis, 45. Councilmember Narcisse. Councilmember Brannan, 47. Councilmember Vernikoff, 48.
Yes.
Who voted? So I could also record your attendance. Thank you. Councilmember Carr, 50. And on behalf of the Brooklyn Borough President, I vote yes. I have determined that we do have a quorum. We continue to have a quorum, and that the motion passes. The motion carries 18 yes, no, 1 abstention. So that does finally conclude the presentation on the Department of City Planning matter. Updates from Borough Board members. Chairperson Mujica Diaz. Chairperson Mujica Diaz, you're recognized.
I'll be as quick as possible, Teresa. I'm tired as well. CB 13, just to notify you guys that the Gambling Commission will be presenting details on what's next on the process of upcoming selections of casinos in New York on Wednesday, May 29th at 6:30, St. Paul's Church in our district. Beach opening is the 23rd of May. Lifeguards will be present between 10 and 5 p.m., 7 days a week. We again are going to be hosting the half marathon again on May 18th. Now I have a little statement. So my statement is how I, and I'm sure other community boards, felt disrespected on the appointments of board members. Because I say others because we have a little chat and we talked about it. We met with your office prior to reappointments. Why there was no promise that all our suggestions would be granted. It was to my dismay how the appointments were approved. Members were removed without notice to reapply because of redistricting. That's disrespectful in my opinion. Members were appointed and removed effective immediately. Members give years of their lives, and to be dismissed immediately is disrespectful to all around. New members have no clue what's going on and are left in the dark. Staff had to contact members ASAP to inform them that what is their next step. I requested at that meeting a week of preparation would have been nice, but obviously it went out the window. Now, my biggest concern in my community board was the biggest slap in our faces. When I say that is because CB 13 reported that a member of the community applied for membership. We wrote a letter saying we don't want this member because of cause and because of other reasonings. We wrote in that letter the reasonings. Not only did we write a letter, 2 of our council members wrote a letter in saying not to appoint this person, and you guys still appointed them. I have no clue what your office is doing, but I sure hope during the next round, my suggestions will be taken. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson Mujica Diaz. Other member updates. Chairperson Baptiste.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I'll do my very best to get through this very quickly. I know because of the lateness of the hour. First of all, I wanted to just give the update with respect to downstate, SUNY downstate. So I want to thank CB 17. We were able to have our town hall. It was well represented with the borough president was there, along with a number of other elected officials. And I think we came through loud and strong in terms of the necessity of maintaining SUNY downstate where it is, and really making sure that we're doing what we need to do to improve SUNY downstate, so that way it meets the needs of the community. So I thank all those who supported, but the conversations are continuing. There is a commission that is going to be formed, so we definitely want to make sure that we're keeping all the board chairs and the elected officials apprised of this. This is a Brooklyn thing. This is not simply something that affects CB 9 and CB 17. This affects a catchment of over 1.2 million people in Brooklyn, so this is critical. And we will make sure we give those updates as we can. And we're asking for the support of all the chairs and the elected officials. Second thing I wanted to talk about very quickly, this is near and dear to my heart as a veteran, but the Veteran Action Group Buffalo Soldiers of America, in conjunction with Brooklyn Public Library and Community Board 9, We're requesting the support of all Brooklyn community boards and elected officials as we plan the second Brooklyn Veterans Appreciation Parade and Resource Fair. The last one was great. I'm so happy, and I'm so happy we were able to partner with the VAGBSA in terms of putting that together. I think it's important that we honor our veterans. I think it's important that we get out there and we show them the appreciation of our community and honor their sacrifices, as well as also provide those resources to help them as they navigate society, some of them with deep issues, and we want to make sure that they're connected to resources. So the second parade is scheduled to take on Eastern Parkway from Rogers Avenue to Grand Army Plaza, and it's going to culminate in a ceremony and a Veterans Resource Fair at the Central Branch of the Brooklyn Public Library. So again, this is something that we're developing. We will be providing additional information. I would ask for all board chairs to please consider joining us as we go along. I think this is a Brooklyn thing, and we want to make sure we're doing this as Brooklyn Strong. The date, what's the date we have again? Date. October 26th. October. So there's plenty of time to plan. Plenty of time to plan. No, but that's the point. We're doing this now. We're having this conversation now so we can make sure every board is here. Every board is there. And lastly, I just wanted to make that announcement. Community Board 9, we're going to be having a community fair. That's scheduled for June 1st. It's going to be at McNair Park, which is near the intersection of Eastern Parkway and Classen Avenue. We have a great time. It's fun. I invite everyone to come as well. And I thank everyone for allowing me to make these announcements.
Thank you. Chairperson Daley, followed by Chairperson Busereth.
All right, so first, sound like a broken record. I want to go back to downstate. I just also want to thank Chairman Baptiste for his work as well for us to work collaboratively to keep downstate open. So I just want to make sure that, and it's important why I reiterated that is because it's important that we work together as community boards to make things happen. To that vein, Councilmember Lewis's office, Community Board 17, Community Board 14 are working together. We are now building, some of you already know, the Charlotte Chisholm Recreational Center within our unit. We're looking for MWBEs. So if you know someone who owns a business and would like to register for jobs, you can either call our office, or obviously you can email me, CB17 chairperson. That's easy, CB17 chairperson, or you can speak to a Councilmember Louise' his office, and I think Dan is over there, can take your information as well. On May 18th, Community Board Education and Youth Committee Chairperson Gail Grandison will be hosting a spelling bee, right? So we're inviting, if you have a child that attends school in CB17, you live in 17, or you know somebody who's in 17, we're asking for, it will be held at Meyer 11, or IS 285, which is on the corner of Beverly and Ralph, from 1 p.m. to 6 p.m. So we're asking for support, again, for collaboration with the board to come out and support. Again, that's May 18th, spelling bee. Your child needs to be, or that child needs to be in the second grade, or let's do age 7 through 13. So that's going to be May 18th at Meyer 11. Lastly, I'm only going to say one. I wasn't here last month for last meeting, due to illness, but I wanted to bring up in February, our board lost a member. Pearline Fields, one of our executive member and the chair of housing. Unfortunately, she died. She unfortunately passed. I don't want to use that word. She unfortunately passed on that date, and I just would like to, to inform our board that we are all human, we're all volunteers, and a lot of times these things happen, and we should also recognize those people who have worked at the board. So, and I know she has done some collaboration with Community Board 9, and ironically, we got a $338,000 bus, shower bus, because of her, who actually made a request to Congresswoman Yvette Clarke's office. So now we have that money to spend, and we don't know how to spend it. So congratulations to her posthumously, and just, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson Daley. We do want to note that the Borough President sent a letter of condolence, and we'll, on that behalf, and let's briefly just take a moment of recognition. Thank you. Chairperson Busereth.
Just quickly, on May 18th, Saturday, May 18th, Community Board 3 is hosting a shredding event. We're trying to fill the 12,000-pound truck. We got halfway last time, so if nearby community boards, if you, your residents want to shred their things for free, we'll be at Marcy Plaza. That's at the corner of Marcy and Fulton Street on May 18th from 10 to 2. Additionally, we're having a small business mixer and resource fair on May 30th at Restoration Plaza, which is at across the street, 1368 Fulton Street, 6 o'clock.
Thank you. Any Chairperson Morgan, and then we'll go to you, Mr. Heredia.
Hi. So I have raised this concern, but I want to raise it here just in case anyone else is having the same issue. I had two board members to, I guess, echo Lucy's concern about the board member appointment. Had two board members that were removed concerning attendance, which I believe they were incorrectly removed. And, it's concerning because there are board members, other board members who are less active than those board members, and somehow they were reappointed. I think that those, in that particular instance, where, and I believe that those members maybe they still had another year or so on their appointment, and they may have been removed prematurely. It wasn't that they weren't reappointed, it was that they were removed from a current term that they were already serving in, which for me is problematic because I definitely did not receive an email asking for any confirmation or any, was there any concern, any recommendations, should these board members be removed? And so it was just done. And so the only way that I found out was when those board members started to reach out to me to say, hey, I received this email. Additionally, one of the other board members shared that the email was dated April 2025, which is, a date in the future. So, so it's problematic, and obviously, some other individual has been, appointed to their spot, and so I do believe that to the extent that that was an error, the members that were possibly put in those spots should be notified that they unfortunately were appointed, in error, and that those two board members should be reinstated to their terms if that is the case. And I think I won't say that you all are not trying to improve the communication between chairpersons and Borough Hall with regard to those appointments, but I still think that there's some work, I guess, that needs to be done because there's, obviously the whole issue with the redistricting and not letting folks know that as a result of redistricting. So I think there was some gaps in communication as to the reasons why some people have been removed, because there's some people who basically got railroaded, I think, in the trying to improve or trying to reappoint people, and for me, my chairperson of seniors, who has been doing an annual breast cancer walk for the last 7 years, who is engaged with a number of seniors in our community on a monthly basis, has workshops to keep seniors informed, and this person's been removed. This is a person who is actually doing a tremendous amount of service to the community, but was basically removed in a very dishonorable way, if you will. And so I really would ask that that be corrected.
Thank you for that, Chairperson Morgan. Mr. Heredia. For Councilmember Lewis.
No worries. Thank you so much. On behalf of Councilmember Farrah Lewis, I just wanted to make announcements that New York City Council is hosting their annual Haitian Flag Day celebration. It will be taking place on Thursday, May 16th, starting at 6 p.m., hosted at the Brooklyn Children's Museum, 145 Brooklyn Avenue, open to all, food, refreshments, and performances. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Heredia. An update, simply that in the budget, the Albany process, one of the changes in the budget was to extend the hybrid meeting reality through June 30th, 2026. So there's a 2-year extension of the hybrid meeting. That's the notion that some people could participate by video if a quorum is present. Just wanted to flag that for you. So concludes the member updates. In terms of other business, on a quick, hopefully, chair's motion, it seems sensible that we should be starting at 6:30. It seems that most people show up at 6:30, so instead of changing that, seeing that there's at least one member who objects, we'll then probably not try to resolve this right now, because an objection would, of course, mean we probably have to have a vote. So we will, please weigh in to us, send us emails on your thoughts as to at what time the Borough Board meeting should be starting. Our sense is 6:30. We see some of you disagree. Please weigh in. So certainly, with there being no clarity on that, there is no other business. That means we are scheduled to come back here on Tuesday, June 4th at 6 p.m. for now. We'll tell you if the time changes based on your input. With that, this May 2024 Borough Board meeting is adjourned. Thank you all. Have a good evening.